In 1845, the Dowlais Ironworks in Merthyr Tydfil employed 7,300 men, women and children, operated 18 blast furnaces across 40 acres of buildings and produced 88,400 tons of iron in a single year. It was the largest ironworks in the world. The town around it was the largest in Wales, home to 4 ironworks so productive that together they constituted the greatest concentration of iron output on Earth. By the 1820s, Merthyr was the source of 40% of Britain's iron exports. The world's first steam railway journey had already been made on its tram roads. The Tsar of Russia had sent a representative to inspect its furnaces. An ironmaster's wife had signed, on a single order, a contract for 50,000 tons of rails and called it the largest of its kind ever made. Today, the county borough of Merthyr Tydfil has a population of 58,972. It is smaller than it was in 1851. It ranks persistently among the most deprived communities in Wales. The distance between those two facts, between the largest ironworks in the world and a town that cannot quite fill its own Victorian footprint, is the story of Merthyr Tydfil. It begins with 6 furnaces, not symbolic furnaces, actual furnaces standing over 10 meters high on the western bank of the River Taff, built of local stone and slag, the largest and most complete surviving blast furnaces of their type anywhere. They were started in 1766. They are still there, and the story of how they came to stand in silence behind a retail park at the edge of a town that was once the iron capital of the world starts with a lease, a piece of paper, and a man named Bacon. The town is named after a dead girl. Tydfil, a 5th century Christian princess, is said to have been murdered by pagans at prayer around 480 AD. And the place where she fell became Merthyr Tydfil, the martyr's burial ground. For 1,000 years after her death, nothing much happened there. The parish sat in the valley of the Taff, at the northern edge of what would become Glamorgan, hemmed in by hills whose slopes held coal, iron ore, limestone, and fast-running mountain water, in quantities that would later prove almost absurd. But for centuries, these assets were geological footnotes. The settlement had no port, no navigable river, and no road that would flatter the word. In 1760, it contained 40 houses. The entire population could have been seated in a modest chapel and still left room for the choir. The hills were green, the streams ran clear, the coal was underfoot, untouched, and would remain so for another generation. The Taff Fall and the Taff Fechan ran down from the beacons and met just north of the settlement, forming the River Taff, which drained south toward Cardiff and the sea. The Dowlais Ironworks were founded first, in September 1759, when a partnership of 9 men, including Isaac Wilkinson, an ironmaster from Bersham in North Wales, pooled a capital of £4,000 to set up a furnace on the banks of a stream called the Dowlais. The name means black stream in Welsh, which was apt, but Dowlais in those early years was modest, a single furnace producing pig iron, and the valley might have stayed modest with it had a man from Cumberland not taken an interest in the land next door. Anthony Bacon was baptised on the 24th of January 1717 in St. Bees, the son of a ship's captain. He made his first fortune in the Atlantic trade, moved to London, succeeded John Wilkes as Member of Parliament for Aylesbury in 1764, and a year later signed a lease that would transform a hamlet into a metropolis. On the 29th of August, 1765, Bacon and his partner William Brownrigg of Whitehaven leased 4,000 acres of virgin mineral land stretching from Cyfarthfa southward down the Taff Valley, a district loaded with coal, iron ore and limestone, for 99 years at an annual rent of £100. No royalties, £100 a year for 4,000 acres of the richest mineral land in Britain, a price that would look absurd within a decade and insane within 2. The first blast furnace at Cyfarthfa, 50 feet high, was lit in 1767. and the furnace bank, the one that still stands today, began with one. The problem with Merthyr Tydfil was not production, it was transport. The ironworks could smelt ore and hammer it into bar iron, but they could not move it. In the 1770s and 80s, pig iron was carried from the valley to the coast by pack horses, a method so primitive it reads as satire. Roads were eventually built, but a wagon drawn by 4 horses could haul only 2 tons. The economics were suffocating. Then came the canal. The Glamorganshire Canal was authorised by Parliament on the 9th of June 1790, backed by the ironmasters themselves, and the engineering fell to Thomas Dadford, a pupil of the great canal builder James Brindley. The task was formidable. Over its 25 miles, the land dropped 543 feet, requiring 50 locks, some of them double, one at Nantgar a triple. 16 locks were packed into a single mile between Aberfan and Quaker's Yard. Where the fall was 200 feet, it took a barge over 2 hours to navigate that stretch alone. A proposed branch to Dowlais was abandoned because it would have had to climb 411 feet in 1 3/4 miles, a gradient that defeated even Canal Mania's optimism. Construction started from the Merthyr end in August 1790. The canal opened after delays, breaches and an arbitration dispute in which the canal company had the Dadfords arrested on the 10th of February 1794. The total cost was £103,600. The transformation was immediate. A single horse drawing a canal barge could now tow 25 tons of freight and cargo. What had taken weeks by packhorse took days by water. The ironmasters, who had been sitting on some of the richest mineral deposits in Britain with no economical way to reach a port, could suddenly compete with anyone. And competing was what Richard Croshay intended to do. Born in Normanton, Yorkshire on the 1st of October 1739, Croshay had arrived in the iron trade through London, working as an agent supplying cannon to the Board of Ordnance. After Anthony Bacon's death in 1786, he took over the entire Cyfarthfa works. He was shrewd, relentless, and by 1799, one of 10 known British millionaires. In May 1787, he licensed Henry Court's puddling process, a technique for refining pig iron into wrought iron that Cyfarthfa was among the first to adopt commercially. By 1803, the works employed 1,500 people and was, by most contemporary accounts, the biggest ironworks in the world. The previous year, with Britain at war with France and demand for ordnance at its peak, the reputation of Cyfarthfa iron had grown so formidable that Admiral Nelson had visited the works in person to inspect the casting of cannon. Nelson was said to have favoured Cyfarthfa iron for his guns, and the Croshay family would place cannonballs on their crest. The cannon that armed the fleet at Trafalgar 3 years on were, by all probability, Merthyr made. Then, on the 21st of February 1804, a Cornish engineer named Richard Trevithick settled a bet. Samuel Homfray, owner of the Penydarren Ironworks, had wagered 500 guineas with a rival ironmaster that Trevithick's new high-pressure steam locomotive could haul 10 tons of iron along the tram road from Penydarren to the canal wharf at Aberfan, 9 miles downhill. It did. It hauled the 10 tons, plus 5 wagons and 70 men, completing the world's first steam-powered railway journey. The locomotive was too heavy for its own rails, cracking the cast iron plates beneath it, and was quietly retired to drive a forge hammer. Trevithick moved on, eventually to the silver mines of Peru. He returned a decade later to England, penniless, and died in Dartford in 1833, so destitute that his workmates paid for the funeral. But the principle had been proved in Merthyr, 21 years before George Stephenson's rocket ran at Rainhill, and the age of the railway was born in a valley that most of England could not have found on a map. The canal fed the boom, the railway would supercharge it, and into the gap between those two revolutions stepped the man who would make Dowlais the largest ironworks on earth. Josiah John Guest was born in Dowlais on the 2nd of February 1785, the eldest child of Thomas Guest. His grandfather, John Guest, had come from Shropshire to help start a furnace in the 1760s. Josiah took sole charge of the Dowlais works in 1807, and he ran them with a commercial intelligence that his competitors found difficult to match. By the 1830s, Dowlais was the largest ironworks in the world, employing more than 5,000 people. When the railway age arrived in earnest, Guest recognized instantly that the future of his business was rails, and he moved to secure it. In conjunction with Anthony Hill, owner of the Plymouth Ironworks, he formed the Taff Vale Railway Company and hired a young engineer from Bristol, Isambard Kingdom Brunel, to build the line. Brunel completed the Taff Vale Railway in 1841. Iron and steel could now travel from Merthyr to Cardiff docks in under an hour. Before the canal, a pack horse had taken days. Before the railway, a canal barge had taken hours. Now, a locomotive could do it in minutes. Each revolution in transport compressed the distance between the valley and the world, and each compression made Merthyr richer. Meanwhile, on the hill above Cyfarthfa, William Croshay II was building a castle. Known as the Iron King, Croshay had been appointed to manage the works by his father, who preferred to oversee the family's London wharf and treated his son as a subordinate. After one threatened resignation, the elder Croshay wrote to him, "My dear Will, don't play the fool. You are now Viceroy of Cyfarthfa and will be sovereign early enough if you will be content to allow His present Majesty some shadow of royalty." The younger Croshay was not content. He expanded the works and, in 1824, commissioned Robert Luger to design Cyfarthfa Castle, a castellated mansion in local stone with 15 towers and 72 rooms, costing £30,000 and looking down upon his own furnaces from 158 acres of parkland. It was not a subtle building. It was not meant to be. From its windows, the Croshays could watch their own furnaces working, the glow of the molten iron visible at night, the smoke rising by day. The castle had a brewhouse, an ice house, and cellars stocked with over 15,000 bottles of wine and spirits, including 7,500 bottles of port. Below it, the men who made his fortune lived in conditions that rendered the word housing generous. In 1833, Josiah Guest married Lady Charlotte Bertie, 21 years old, the daughter of the Earl of Lindsay. She had disliked her stepfather and viewed her move to industrial Wales as a providential escape. She threw herself into the business, discussed technical matters with Charles Babbage, translated a French pamphlet on the use of hot blast, and completed her English translation of the Mabinogion, the great collection of Welsh folk tales, in 1843. She established, with her husband, an ambitious school system for the Dowlais workforce, extending from infancy into adulthood. When Guest fell ill and died in 1852, Lady Charlotte took over the management of Dowlais, the largest producer of iron in the world, while raising 10 children. She did not do this quietly. The numbers in these decades beggar patience. In 1834, Dowlais had 12 blast furnaces and cleared a profit of £50,096. By 1836, it was producing 20,000 tons of rails a year and exporting to Berlin and St. Petersburg. In 1844, Russia ordered 50,000 tons in a single contract. By 1845, the works covered 40 acres, consumed 1,500 tons of coal weekly, and its 18 furnaces produced over 1,700 tons of iron every week. 80,000 tons of ironstone and 140,000 tons of coal were raised from the surrounding hills each year to feed them. The population of the town had leapt from 7,705 in 1801 to 22,000 in 1831 and 46,378 by 1851, making Merthyr by far the largest town in Wales. Irish immigrants made up 10% of the population. There were Spaniards, Italians, and a Jewish community that established a prayer hall by 1851 and consecrated a synagogue on Victoria Street in 1875. None of this growth came without cost, and the cost was borne in the usual direction. In 1841, more than 1,500 families of up to 5 people were living in single rooms, measuring roughly 4.5 feet by 7 feet. Life expectancy in working-class households had fallen to 21 years. The ironmasters built castles, the workers died young in rooms smaller than the castle's pantries. In June 1831, those workers rose, protesting William Crosshay's wage cuts and the seizure of debtors' goods by the Court of Requests. They marched on the town. Thomas Llewellyn, a Cyfarthfa coal miner, led a rally at Hirwaun Common, where the crowd killed a calf, dipped a white cloth in its blood, impaled a loaf of bread on its staff, and raised it as a banner. Between 7,000 and 10,000 workers seized control of Merthyr for a full week, the first time the red flag was flown as a symbol of workers' revolt on British soil. They stormed the Court of Requests and destroyed the debtors' records. They besieged the magistrates and ironmasters in the Castle Hotel. The army was sent. Soldiers and workers fought in the streets, and when it was over, at least 24 people were dead. Richard Lewis, known as Dick Penderyn, was hanged at Cardiff on the 13th of August, protesting his innocence. 28 men and women were tried at Cardiff Assizes. Some were sentenced to transportation. The Home Secretary would later describe Merthyr as the worst and most formidable district in the kingdom. The historian Gwyn Williams would put it differently. In Merthyr Tydfil in 1831, the prehistory of the Welsh working class came to an end. Its history began. In 1832, Josiah John Guest was elected the first Member of Parliament for Merthyr Tydfil, and Adrian Stevens, an engineer at Dowlais, invented the steam whistle. It was never patented. 2 facts from the same year and the same town, one celebrated and one forgotten, both entirely characteristic. By the middle of the century, a boy named Joseph Parry was singing in Ross O'Banon's choir in Georgetown, Merthyr, and working his shifts at the Cyfarthfa ironworks. He had gone into the pits at 9 and the ironworks at 12. In 1854, his family emigrated to Danville, Pennsylvania, where he worked in the rolling mills and studied music with other Welsh emigrants. He sent compositions by post to the National Eisteddfod in Wales, won so consistently that the Welsh communities of North America raised a fund to send him to the Royal Academy of Music in London, and returned to Wales to become the first professor of music at the University College of Wales, Aberystwyth. He composed My Fanwy, whose melody is known to anyone who has heard a Welsh choir, and Blodwen, the first opera in the Welsh language. He had learned to sing in the shadow of the furnaces, and the furnaces were still burning when he left. Merthyr, in the second half of the century, was a town that believed in its own permanence. Walk down High Street in those years, and you pass to the Castle Hotel and Posting House, the Market House, the Post Office, the shop fronts of clothiers and jewellers and watchmakers, many of them run by families who had come from halfway across Europe to make their living in the iron capital. Turn on to Victoria Street, and there was the synagogue, consecrated in 1875 to serve a community of merchants and Russian Jewish labourers who had found work at the Dowlais works. The town had non-conformist chapels in such profusion that the oldest, Innisgow, had been holding Welsh language services since 1749. The chapels were the town's civic architecture, its concert halls and debating chambers and schools, built and rebuilt as congregations swelled, each grander than the last, their facades rising in stone and stucco above the terraced streets, as if competing for the attention of God and the ironmasters alike. Zoar Chapel, completed in 1842, seated hundreds. The 4-part harmonies that poured from their doors on a Sunday were the sound of a community that had built its own culture from the materials of its own labour. Robert Thompson Croshay, the last ironmaster at Cyfarthfa, founded the celebrated Cyfarthfa brass band, equipping it lavishly, largely for his own pleasure. It became one of the finest musical ensembles of the Victorian period. The band outlasted the ironworks. It had played, in its years of glory, dance music and marches and arrangements that have since been reconstructed from surviving manuscripts, the sound of a lost industrial society entertaining itself with a sophistication that would surprise those who think of ironworkers only as figures in grime. Merthyr hosted the National Eisteddfod in 1881 and again in 1901. Its population kept climbing, sustained now less by iron than by the coal seams beneath it, reaching 80,990 by the census of 1911. In 1900, a Scottish former coal miner named Keir Hardy was elected as Member of Parliament for Merthyr Tydfil, one of the first 2 Labour Members of Parliament in history. The constituency that had returned an ironmaster as its first representative in 1832 now returned the founder of the Labour Party. And in 1870, John Hughes, born in Merthyr in 1814, had left the valley entirely, travelled to the Russian Empire and founded a city. He called it Húsaovka. It is now Donetsk. Merthyr was not merely making iron, it was making the people and the ideas that made the world that ran on iron. The town believed, with the confidence of 80,000 souls and a century of growth behind it, that this was permanent. But iron production had already begun its decline from 1860. The flaw had been there from the start, a flaw of geology. Merthyr's ironstone was rich enough for smelting, but it was high in phosphorus, and when Bessemer's process for converting pig iron into steel arrived in the 1860s, phosphorus was the enemy. Bessemer steel required low phosphorus ore, and Merthyr's deposits could not supply it. Dowlais, under the management of William Menelaus, was the first ironworks in the world to license the Bessemer process in 1865. But the ore now had to be imported, chiefly from Spain, and here the same geography that had once given Merthyr everything began to take it back. A landlocked valley at the head of a river with no navigable outlet was the worst possible place to receive shiploads of foreign ore. The cost of hauling it uphill from Cardiff docks erased the advantage. By the 1870s, ironstone mining had ceased altogether in the Merthyr area. The raw material that had made the valley's fortune was exhausted or useless, and the replacement had to travel by ship from the Bay of Biscay. The ironmasters responded rationally. In 1891, the Dowlais Company opened a new steelworks at East Moors in Cardiff, beside the docks, where imported ore could be unloaded and processed without a 25-mile journey up a valley. Production began to migrate away from Merthyr, not in a collapse, but in a slow economic drain. Penydarren Ironworks had already closed in 1859. The Plymouth Works followed in 1882. The canal that had started everything, the canal that had cost £103,600 and required 50 locks and 4 years of engineering, closed in sections. Merthyr to Aberfan in 1898. Aberfan to Pontypridd in 1915, the rest by 1942. Its route would be buried in time beneath the A470 trunk road. The waterway that had launched the Iron Age of South Wales vanished under tarmac, and today a driver can travel its entire length without knowing it was ever there. At Cyfarthfa, the Croshays delayed. The family that had built a castle overlooking their furnaces proved unable or unwilling to convert fully to steel. The ironworks ceased primary operations in 1874, and though sporadic steel production was attempted over the following decades, the works closed permanently in 1919 and were dismantled in 1928. The furnace bank survived only because the cylindrical Bessemer furnaces built in front of it in the 1880s acted accidentally as a retaining wall. Robert Thompson Croshay died in 1879. He was buried at Vaynor Church on a remote hillside near Pontsdysil, beneath a quarrystone slab that weighed, by contemporary report, 9 tons, measured 11 feet 2 inches long and 7 feet 2 inches wide, and bore an inscription of 2 words, "God forgive me." No one recorded what he meant by it. The inscription has done its own work for 140 years. What followed was not so much a fall as an emptying. The iron was gone. Coal sustained the population through the turn of the century, but coal mining in South Wales entered its own long contraction after the First World War. By the 1930s, the Depression had arrived, and Merthyr Tydfil was among the places least equipped to withstand it. Iron and steel making stopped at Dowlais in 1930. The heavy plant transferred to Cardiff and Port Talbot. The big mill continued to operate, employing 700 to 800 men, but by 1936 even this was reduced to a general castings foundry with 250 workers. That same year, King Edward VIII visited the derelict Dowlais steelworks and was reported to have said that something must be done to get the men back to work. The remark was taken as political interference. Within months, he had abdicated, and nothing was done. Unemployment exceeded 25%. The Jewish community, which had grown to around 400 at its peak, dwindled as families left for America and Canada. Many of the Russian Jewish labourers who had worked at Dowlais never returned. The chapels that had been built for congregations of hundreds now preached to dozens. In 1947, the collieries were nationalised, which saved some jobs but placed the valley's remaining industry under the control of a distant bureaucracy that had little reason to be sentimental about geography. The population, which had peaked at 80,990 in 1911, fell to 69,558 by 1951. The town that had been the largest in Wales was hemorrhaging people. A lifeline arrived in 1948. The Hoover Company built a washing machine factory at Pentrabach on the site of the old Plymouth Ironworks and opened it on the 12th of October with an initial workforce of 350. A special train ran from London Paddington to bring dignitaries to the event. The factory grew. By the 1960s and 70s, it employed 5,000 people and was the largest employer in the borough. Betty Probert, who joined the production line and stayed for 36 years, got a job there for her twin sister and called the place a home from home. Hoover offered sports, outdoor pursuits, Christmas parties, and a sense of purpose that the valley had not felt in 2 decades. Princess Margaret visited in 1950. For a generation, the factory was Merthyr's answer to the question of what comes after iron. Then the answer stopped answering. Hoover was sold to the Italian Candy Group in 1995. The workforce underwent a steady decline. A fire tore through the factory in 2002. In 2004, amid talk of 130 job losses, workers went on strike. Closure was announced in November 2008. Production ended on the 13th of May 2009 with the loss of 337 jobs. Manufacturing moved to the Czech Republic and the Far East. The Plymouth Ironworks had closed in 1882. The Hoover factory that replaced it closed 127 years later. For the same structural reason, it was cheaper to make things somewhere else. On the 21st of October 1966, between these 2 closures, a rain-soaked spoil tip from the Merthyr Vale colliery slid down the mountainside above the village of Aberfan, 4 miles south of Merthyr Tydfil, and engulfed the Pantglas Junior School. The children had just returned to their classrooms after singing All Things Bright and Beautiful at assembly. 144 people were killed. 116 of them were children. The National Coal Board had ignored repeated warnings, including a letter from the town clerk of Merthyr in 1959 referencing the potential danger of the tip. Aberfan is not the cause of Merthyr's decline, but it is the decline made unbearably specific, the waste from the industry that was supposed to sustain the valley after iron, burying the valley's children. The disaster fund raised £1.75 million from around the world. The government required the fund itself to contribute £150,000 towards the cost of removing the remaining tips. The money was not repaid until 1997. The population continued to fall. 59,802 in 1971, 55,981 in 2001. It stabilized eventually near 59,000 and has held there the lowest growth rate in Wales, a town in equilibrium with its own contraction. Today, the county borough of Merthyr Tydfil has a population of 58,972. It sits between the Brecon Beacons and Cardiff, 30 minutes from the capital by the A470, a road that follows approximately the route of the old canal. The economy runs on public services, distribution, and a growing adventure tourism trade built on the hills the ironmasters stripped. Bike Park Wales, opened in 2013 at the Gethin Woodland Centre, draws mountain bikers from across Britain to trails cut into the same forested slopes that once supplied timber for charcoal. The old Rydycar West site was approved for development in January 2026, with the council calling it groundbreaking and a complete game-changer, language that Merthyr has heard before. Cyfarthfa Castle, Grade 1 listed, has been a museum and art gallery since 1910. The school that once occupied its upper floors is gone. The rooms where the Iron King entertained now display the social history of the town he built, including, in a glass case, the world's first steam whistle, invented by Adrian Stevens at Dowlais in 1832 and never patented. Joseph Parry's cottage in Georgetown is preserved, a two-room ironworker's dwelling where the composer of My Fanwy was born. The Pontycaf now, the 14-metre iron truss bridge, designed by Watkin George in 1793 for the Cyfarthfa Ironworks, acknowledged as the world's oldest surviving iron railway bridge, is undergoing a £4.5 million restoration funded jointly by the Welsh Government and Merthyr Tydfil County Borough Council. Work began in August 2025. The bridge once carried limestone and water into the works. It will carry pedestrians. Zuar Chapel, built in 1801 and rebuilt in 1842 to seat a congregation that had outgrown every previous structure, is now Canolfan Soar, a community arts centre with a 200-seat theatre. The hymns have given way to stand-up comedy and touring bands, which is its own kind of continuity. John Hughes of Merthyr founded a city in the Russian Empire in 1870, exporting the knowledge of iron-making he had learned in this valley to the Ukrainian steppe. Yugoslavia became Donetsk. Donetsk is now a war zone. The town that exported its industrial revolution has outlived the city its industrial revolution created. Extensive land reclamation programs have eliminated the slag heaps that once scarred the hillsides. The tips are gone. The valley has been re-greened, not by policy alone, but by time, the hills slowly reclaiming what the ironmasters stripped. A visitor arriving from Cardiff on the A470, climbing through the valley along the line of the buried canal, might not guess what this place once was until they reached the town centre and turned toward the river. The 6 blast furnaces at Cyfarthfa stand where they have stood since the 1760s on the western bank of the Taff, just below the point where the Taff 4 and Taff Fechan meet. The furnace bank is over 10 metres high. The charging ramp behind it is overgrown. The blast tunnel is sealed. The stonework is blackened and the iron fittings are rusted to the colour of old blood. A few hundred yards to the south, there is a retail park. The river runs beneath the furnaces the way it did when Anthony Bacon lit the first one 260 years ago. The furnaces were built to be fed. They were fed coal and ore and limestone and water and labour, and they turned all of it into iron, and the iron went to build the railways and the bridges and the cannon of an empire. And then the empire found cheaper places to make iron, and the feeding stopped. The river has not stopped, the furnaces have.